God, we come to you with these prayers, people that we're concerned about. So many of them are health related. We forget in times when we have good health to be thankful. We forget to acknowledge how good that is. And we are thankful for those that have that. We've seen prayers answered in the last couple of weeks. Some of these things we don't always understand. But we have people that we've called out by name, people that we remember, and we ask for your hand on them. We know there are others who aren't even to our attention. But these are the ones we're concerned about because we know them. They're the ones that you've brought into our lives. Remember, as we see other people suffering, that's part of our job here. Help us to remember that we bring comfort, we bring grace and concern even that's uncommon in this world. And help us to learn about that as we study your words. Amen.
Okay, believe it or not, we are on week 24 of Matthew, and we're on Matthew 23. So that's driving me crazy. No, we're 1 week behind. I'm sorry. I just tease him about numbers all the time. Where we left off, remember, Jesus is in Jerusalem for the last time, and it is Passover week. And it's been Passover week for a couple of weeks of our study. So when you think about the Gospel of Matthew, there are many chapters on the last week of his life. And the other thing to remember, it's Passover week in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem, the population of Jerusalem swells. And I was supposed to look up how many times, and I forgot, but it's
maybe 10
times the amount of its normal population. So you have to think that there are huge crowds of people in Jerusalem at this time. And where we left off last week, where, Jesus had already had both a debate, if you will, with the Sadducees and with the Pharisees and won. And at this point, he has turned his conversation back to the crowd, but we can assume that at least the Pharisees and the scribes, because he addresses them in this chapter, are still hanging around and they're standing there. So it's his disciples are there, the crowd of followers or interested people are there, and the Pharisees and scribes are there. And we left off on Matthew 23 and verse 13. And there are 7 woes. So like right now, like I said, he has turned to the Pharisees and the scribes to have them told. And there is 7 woes. And we talked about the first one last week, but I'm going to reread that one. So we are in chapter 23, verse 13. Jesus is speaking. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the kingdom of heaven in men's face. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those who wish to enter. Want to say anything about that?
No, I think you covered the fact that there are big crowds, and the Pharisees and Sadducees are. And this is important because I know sometimes people hear Jesus rides in on Palm Sunday, and they're saying Hosanna to the King, and putting palm fronds in front of him. And then only a few days later, you hear people screaming, crucify him. How does that happen? And the Pharisees and Sadducees have come out. As Mary said, this Jerusalem is 10 times its normal population. So what would that be for Rockport? Larry, what's our normal population? 5,000? It would be 50,000 in a town of 5. It is amazingly packed in. And so when you draw a crowd, it's the crowd of the year. And the Pharisees and Sadducees have been there trying to trip him up to separate him from the people, but they're still there. And so now it's his turn. And he turns to the crowd and tells them the Pharisees and Sadducees are in charge. Do what they say, but don't do what they do. So he's talking to them, and then he turns around to the Pharisees and Sadducees. And there's actually, this is not just to get them told. We're going to explain today what's really going on here. But he rounds on them, and he begins to speak very, very forcefully to them in ways that are beyond insulting. And so he talks, he's talked about how all they really care about is power and money and the acclaim that they get. And he's taken them to task for some things.
I don't know about you, but I always had this growing up in the church and learning about Jesus, that he was the sort of, what do you call, milquetoast, passive Jesus. I mean, he and think of him standing in this town or this city of that's 10 times, and he's speaking forcefully to these people. This is not
in front of the crowd. That's the harsh part. Yeah.
Verse 15, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You traverse land and sea to win a single convert. And when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are.
So I know this confuses a lot of people. That word convert is actually proselyte. And so there are people who convert to Judaism. They have to go through the whole process. The men have to be circumcised, and but they convert and they become Jews, just like any other. It's sort of, welcome to the family. The Jews proselytize. They go out and try and get people to convert to Judaism.
Greeks and Romans.
Greeks and Romans, Gentiles. But why this is confusing, they don't go invite poor people or, commoners, lowly people. They're looking for people to add to the tribe that are going to bring money and power and influence, and they'll have influence in the Greek and Roman world too. What a great system. And so they wind up, these proselytes wind up having all the worst characteristics of the Jews and the worst characteristics of the Gentiles. They're, fine young cannibals. And so the Jews bring them in and say, look, you can get even more money and power if you come with us. And then they teach them these Jewish ways. And what he's saying is, you wind up making these people even worse than you are. You're polluting what we would consider Judaism. You're turning it into a political money and power thing. And that's really all that one is about. But he's pointing, watch as this develops, though.
And what do you want to just address son of hell?
Oh, not very much. You make him more of a son of hell than you are. So the word hell is Gehenna. And people want to so badly to come up with a set of rules. So what is hell? Is there really a hell? Is, yeah. Gehenna is a place outside of a town. It's a dump. It's a solid waste dump. They burn fires there. If you think our sanitation system here would be a little gross, from this time, it's a nasty place. And the fires go. Well, we see in, like, even today in places like India, there are people, the outcasts, who live out of their dumps. And it's a horrible existence. It's a place you don't want to be. You certainly wouldn't want to be confined there. And so when they're trying to describe hell as a place of separation from God, as a place you don't want to be, they used a local place that everybody knows, Gehenna,
which was right outside of Jerusalem.
So that's what that is, and it's no proof of anything other than we go looking for words that everyone knows so that we can communicate. I mean, there's nothing wrong with this, but the place they're talking about is sort of an analog to hell. It's a place I can tell you about. Then you'll say, oh, this is a place I don't want to be.
The third woe, verse 16. Woe to you, blind guides! You say, if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. You blind fools, Which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes it sacred? And you say, if anyone swears by the altar, it means nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift on it, he is bound by his oath. You blind men, which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes it sacred? So then, he who swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And he who swears by the temple swears by it and by the one who dwells in it. And he who swears by heaven swears by God's throne and by the one who sits on it.
So this is another one that just confuses people, and I get it. Have any of you ever heard someone say, "Oh, we don't need a contract. We go on a handshake, right? We'll just do a deal on a handshake." Have you ever known of that to go wrong? Yep. Somebody's always getting the raw end of that deal, and saying, "I should have drawn up a contract." Among the Jews, and to some extent even today, but back at that time, it was considered poor taste to want to draw up an actual contract, right? Among Jews, the theory is we don't take advantage of each other. We don't need a drawn out contract. Now it happens. The scribes are basically the lawyers. They're the legal experts. What they do in place of a written contract, though, most of the time, is they swear an oath. They'll go down to the city gates and swear an oath in front of witnesses. That goes wrong just like a handshake. And so they have become experts in wiggling out of oaths, right? But you didn't say in the rainy season. You should have asked that. You didn't say that it didn't include the part on the other side of the dry creek bed. And these things, that's not really my land. That was my brother's land, but he died. And so, and so this is the way their oaths go. And so they're always concerned about finding a way to hold someone else to their oath. And so the scribes help with that, you get the picture of what's going on. And so someone will say, "Well, I swear by the temple." What could be more sacred than that? I give my word. You've heard people say on the lives of my children, right? Same kind of thing. To swear by something that is so sacred and important, surely you won't break that oath. And besides that, now that you've done it, if you do break it, and the people who witnessed it said, "Oh, you defamed the temple," what's happened is they have found a way around swearing by the temple, because the temple is just a building. It's the tithes that people bring that are important. So you don't swear by the temple, you swear by the stuff inside the temple. And then they swear by the altar. "I swear on the altar of Yahweh." Well, they say the altar is just a thing. It's all the gold and stuff. It's really important. And so they swear by the gold on the altar. Now, that may not seem like a big deal, but it reveals a lot about who these people are. There's the verse that says, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will also be." What they have shown by this, of having to swear by the gold, is what's important to them. And it's stuff, right? And what he's saying is, in fact, and I want to bring your attention to something. He says, you blind guides, but he also says, "You fools." You fools. And he's calling them fools because, for one thing, they've elevated stuff above God. But to say that the swearing by the altar is not as binding as swearing by the stuff, and so he calls them fools. I want you to know that word that you read as fools.
Where is that one?
It's in 15, isn't it?
I'll find it. Go ahead.
Anyway, that word is moroi, right? That is the root of our word moron. And I said that last week, and I heard this audible gasp by people. Jesus called people morons. Well, first of all, yes, it's a fool. We attach, and this is why I wrestle so much with this, because now we have this negative thing that, "Oh, you can't ever call someone a moron." You said about, it's the same as saying you fools. Even that's pretty strong. But you do want to understand, he is saying you are really, really foolish, dumb people. Which is more important, the gold on the altar or the altar itself that sanctifies it? Now, later, or there's another two other points where we get told, don't swear these oaths. Just be known as people who keep their word. Let your yes be yes, your no be no. But the purpose in this is he's pointing out to them, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, and I keep trying to convey this to you. He's pointed out to them that they have just become political parties who don't value God. And you see them elevating stuff higher than God himself. And he's pointing that out to them. I mean, you're going to see this progress, and it's going to make more sense what he's doing. But they reveal what their God is. And their God is not Yahweh. It's gold and power and all of that stuff.
And I think it's also a more aggravating insult, because he's now insulting the scribes and Pharisees. When we go from Isaiah, the blind shall see, to you blind guys a couple of sentences ago, to now, hey, you fools, you are intentionally now doing this stuff is greater than Yahweh.
So he is intentionally being hard and insulting on them.
Yeah.
But watch as this chapter develops. There's a clear story being painted here.
Yeah,
and you got to get further down to the end, but watch.
Verse 23, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You pay tithes of mint, dill, and cumin, but you have disregarded the weightier matter of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel.
So there's a whole bunch, as happens, there's a whole bunch going on in that one little paragraph. You can see a lot of it on the surface level. The strain on a gnat, I remember my mom, when I was growing up, talking about someone who would swallow a horse and choke on a fly. You take on some big outrage, and then you choke on some little thing. This doesn't say strain at a gnat. It says strain out a gnat. In the law, there are things they're forbidden to eat. Insects and camels are both on the list. And what he's saying is you put like a piece of cloth when you're pouring wine and stuff to show how pious you are, that you won't even take a chance of a gnat getting into the wine. But the swallowing a camel, it means you ignore the more important things in the law, the really big things. And the camel, remember, a camel is also an unclean animal. So he's not just throwing darts here. He's saying you balk at these little impurities, like you're pious and good. And then you accept all these big things that you're doing wrong, and you don't even think about them. So what I want to do, he says you ignore, they bring tithes. They always are bringing in stuff to show how wealthy they are.
So they give 10% of everything, and they give 10% of, if they grow mint, dill, and cumin, which are herbs, they give 10% of those.
Spices are important.
Right.
If you don't have any spice, if you ever cook all your food for a while with no spice at all, you find out pretty quick how important spices are. So to bring a tithe of those spices is not the small thing it seems like, but spices are expensive. Poor people have salt, and that's pretty much it. So no, he's saying you bring in this money, but you ignore the important things in the law, like justice and mercy and faithfulness. Okay, I'm going to break over. I want to tell you my favorite verse of all, and has been for a long time, is in the book of Micah. This is Micah 6. Okay. Micah is a prophet, and he's bringing literally the word of God to Israel all that time before this. And I want to read this to you, and there's a reason. It actually ties in. But I want to read this to you, and it reads sort of like poetry in the right versions. But he's first talking from the perspective of someone who's saying, what can I do that is important enough, maybe valuable enough to come before God? How can I impress God by offering up something, right? What can I do for myself? It's always that. And so he first says, we'll see if I got the whole thing. If not, I may have to look it up. But he says, here it is. With what shall I come before the Lord? It's like the little drummer boy, right? But in a grown-up sense. With what shall I come before the Lord when I come before the God on high? Should I come to him with burnt offerings, with year-old calves? Okay? Would the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? And you see how they keep escalating this. They know there's not 1,000 rams going to be, or there's not a river of oil, much less 10,000 of those. But he's speaking as someone who's trying to say, I'm going to justify myself before God, me, myself. And so what should I do? Should I bring cows? Should I bring, 10,000 rivers of oil? Is that, will that get it done? And this next part, shall I present my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? Now, you see the foreshadowing on that. You see Abraham in that. You see the idea of, should I offer up my own firstborn when I come before God Most High? And then what Micah does is he answers, and this is the part I really love, but he answers to those people who want to come to God that way, self-justified. And he says, he has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require from you but to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God, right? And it always intrigued me, the concept of being able to walk humbly with your God. But look at what he said all that time ago. What does the Lord require of you? But to act justly, to love mercy. And you understand acting justly is, but to love mercy, I say this time to time, we don't love mercy, except when it's for us. For other people, we love justice. And we see a conflict between justice and mercy, because if someone else does it, they need justice. And if you show them mercy, they get off the hook. I don't want them to get off the hook. To do justice, or to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Now, flash back to what Mary just read when Jesus is talking to them. You've ignored the weightier matters of the law. You've done all this other little stuff, but you've ignored, what are the three things?
Justice, mercy, and faithfulness.
This is right, this is out of Micah. You'll never find this in a cross reference, but I recognize it because I love that verse in Micah. But those two things together should tell you that the fine points of the law, the dotting the I's and everything, miss the point. This is what he's telling them they have done. And he said, you should have done the former, which is tithe. Oh yeah, no, you do that too. But you should have done that without neglecting the latter, which is justice and mercy and faithfulness. So he's pointing out to them these things. And I want to call you back to Micah for just a minute, because when Micah is bringing this prophecy, Israel is about to be judged. Israel is in trouble, okay? And he's letting them know that. Micah has been sent to tell them. Right after those lines that I just read you from Micah, he says, The voice of the Lord calls out to the city, heed the rod and the one who ordained it. And the rod is punishment. Pay attention to the punishment because you're supposed to learn from it. But he says, this is speaking as if God, can I forget any longer, O house of the wicked? These are the Jewish leaders at that time. Can I forget any longer the treasures of wickedness and the short ephah? An ephah is a measurement of when you're selling stuff. And they have gotten to the point that they cheat each other. They don't fill the bucket up, right? In the next one, he says, can I excuse dishonest scales? When you're selling stuff, you put it on a beam, you put a weight here, and you put the stuff there. Well, they have special weights made that aren't quite heavy enough. So they're selling you less than you're really paying for. And that's symbolic of the fact that at the time Micah is saying this, Israel has become so corrupt and they cheat each other, and they're going to be punished for it. That's important to note. It's not just a random observation that I'm making, because it's the same thing happening right now when Jesus is talking. Now keep an eye out for that.
The next woe, verse 25. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisees, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, so that the outside may become clean as well.
It's not hard to see that. They have their dietary kosher laws, everything. Even today, a really strict kosher family has got basically 2 kitchens, but they have 2 dishwashers. They don't wash dishes that have had dairy with. That's how picky they've gotten with the dietary laws. And he's talking about this. He says that you wash the outside of the cup and you make it look all pretty, but on the inside it's still filthy. And clearly he's talking about them. They wash the outside of themselves to present this righteous looking appearance. But on the inside, he says, you're full of every sort of impurity.
Full of greed and self-indulgence.
Greed and self-indulgence. The next one is every sort of, all right. But you know, what he's pointing out, who they have become. Well, let's do the next one because it ties in.
Verse 27, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of dead men's bones and every kind of impurity. In the same way, on the outside you appear to be righteous, but on the inside you're full of hypocrisy and wickedness.
Whitewashed tombs. He's calling them whitewashed tombs. And they do. They have lime and stuff, and they make these tombs look beautiful. The Mount of Olives are covered with them, and it's bright white. They keep them that way. But he says on the inside, those tombs are full of dead men's bones. Now, what you don't probably know is that they are not to touch dead things. Okay? The impurity of touching a dead thing takes at least a week of this cleansing ritual. And you can't come into the temple until you've been certified as pure, and it may take longer. So what the rich, powerful Jewish leaders do is they get nobodies. They get poor people to do the dirty work. And so a guy who deals with dead bodies has no hope of even coming to the temple, because before next week, before I can get clean, something else is going to happen. Or a tanner, somebody who tans hides, they have no hope. So this is what's going on. And he's telling them, you guys think you're clean and pure and justified, but on the inside, you're full of every sort of impurity, like a grave that we know has got unclean, impure, dead men's bones. You're like that on the inside, people. You're so full of this wickedness, you know, but on the outside, you make a show like you're perfectly clean and justified. So you see the progression in this. Next.
Verse 29, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You blind tombs,
Build tombs.
I'm sorry, you build tombs for the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous. And you say, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would have not been partners with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourself that you are the sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of the sin of your fathers. You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape the sentence of hell?
So now we're getting down to it. Jerusalem is known as a killer of prophets. For thousands of years, the Jewish leadership has fallen away from Yahweh, and he sent prophets in to tell them to repent and to tell them sometimes specific things that they need to quit. They're notorious for beating and imprisoning and killing prophets. Jerusalem is known for it, and they have many, many times. And so what he says is, you hypocrites, you build tombs for the prophets. They build these fancy, and that ties in with the last one of the whitewashed tombs, okay? You build these monuments to the prophets. And you tell yourselves, because see, everyone knows that in the past, they've killed prophets. And so these righteous men say, you know, if we had been in charge back then, we wouldn't have killed any prophets. We're better than that. We're better than our ancestral kings. We see the monument we built, and I'll tell you, we wouldn't have killed them. We just wouldn't have behaved that way. This is how they view themselves. This is what he's telling. So and he says, so, okay, you admit you're the descendants of the people who killed the prophets. And in that time, you know, the sins of the father and everything. But he says, you just ratted yourself out. You not only are like those people, you are those people. Okay? If you had been alive, you say you wouldn't have, but if you had been alive at that time, you would have. And he says, fill up then the measure of the sin of your fathers. The measure is the same thing I told you about earlier, the container in the marketplace. So you have this weight on you that goes all the way back to your ancestors. So drink deeply of this essence of who you are. This will make more sense in a few minutes. But he says, you snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape the sentence of hell? Gehenna again, but hell. And he's just telling them, you guys are utterly lost. You are not part of the kingdom of heaven. Now's the payoff, this last one.
Verse 34, because of this, I am sending you prophets and wise men and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and persecute in town after town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly, I tell you, all these things will come upon this generation.
So here we go. We've finally gotten down to the point. You say, if we had been alive, we wouldn't have killed those prophets. He says, you not only would have, you will. And so I'm going to send prophets to you in your lifetime. And that's what he does. And the 12 that are with him, all of them except one, I think, winds up getting killed by these people or people like them. So he says, I'm gonna prove it. I'm gonna send prophets and wise men
and teachers
to you, and you're gonna mistreat them. You're gonna kill them. You're gonna crucify them. You're gonna put them in the arena. The arena with the lions. On and on and on. And it really happens. This is prophecy. But then when he says to them, and here comes, now we're getting to the point, and so upon you, you scribes, you Pharisees, you Sadducees, will come the blood of your ancestors. It's all coming due on you because you have postured yourself as righteous, and you are going to actually kill the Messiah. So you're going to wind up with the weight of all the blood that's ever been shed on you, and it's going to happen in this generation.
Verse 37, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those sent to her. How often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were unwilling. Look, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you that you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
This chapter is amazing. I mean, in all of anything I've ever read, this is one that's on the short list because of what he's done here. And he is pronouncing on them that their time is done. Just like Micah did when he told them the punishment is coming, heed the rod. What he tells them right here is that, you know, Jerusalem, how I've longed to gather you to me like a mother hen gathers her chicks. He loves the people. And this thing about having longing to bring them into communion with God, there's a human trait. He's been concerned about them. But now look carefully at what he's saying. I'm done with you. Your time is done. And he says that he said, you were unwilling to come to me. Now your house, and remember what I read out of Micah, where he talks about the house, right? The parallel to this is uncanny. But he says, your house is left desolate. And that means empty and devoid of light and comfort and everything else. Your house is desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again. And that see is to perceive with your mind. I'm not going to come back to you trying to convince you anymore
that I'm the Messiah.
That I'm the Messiah. You will not perceive me. You're not going to get another chance unless and until you proclaim, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. And that is recognized as a declaration of the Messiah. So unless until you acknowledge that, you're done and I'm done with you. This is a major pronouncement. This is a nexus point in history for all of this. The time of all of this law and them is over.
And that blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord is from Psalm 118. So they would have known that as a messianic psalm.
You remember just a chapter or two ago, they're mad because the people are saying that to him. And they go to him and say, hey, you got to stop this. Don't you understand? They're calling you the Messiah. So they know what it means. When he says, you're not going to understand or perceive me unless and until you proclaim I'm the Messiah. And he is done with them. That to me is chilling. And you see all the reasons why. They've elevated stuff above God. They've created their own God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Okay? And you begin to see as he went through this, he's stepping through the fact that they have taken the law and what's important in the law and thrown it away in favor of things like the Shabbat elevator. Remember we told you that we were in Israel and we're going to the top of the Hilton and we got on the elevator and it stopped at every floor. We were late for a meeting. And they said, oh, you got on the Shabbat elevator. What do you mean? Well, pushing the button on the elevator is work. And so they get first of all, that's silly. And second of all, they get around it by just wiring the elevator to stop. So they get to do what they want to do and still claim that they're following the law. And this is the stuff they get bogged down in. And so he stepped them through that. He says, you've perverted the law so bad, you've strained out all the gnats, and you've let in all the
and not just to pick on the Jews or the modern Jews. It's not like Christians do this all the time too.
This is not a pick on the Jew section. It's not about that because we do it. But they've been the ones, as he says, who are essentially over what is known, they would know as the kingdom. They put themselves in that position, and they have turned it into something filthy, something ugly. And as he said, you've kept people away from the kingdom of heaven, and I'm done with you.
And this lament over Jerusalem, this last part, when he's talking about Jerusalem, oh Jerusalem, that is also seen in the Gospel of Luke. And in the Gospel of Luke, it says that Jesus cried while he said this.
Jesus wept.
I mean, so this was, Jesus is not happy about this. I mean, Jesus is not happy about this, but this is the time.
It is also, though, something that's been foretold. We say a lot. Sometimes we ask for things or we try and figure out what's going on. And we say that God does things in the fullness of time. He does things in his own time. What you see from this is that it's time. When he left the Galilee, and I tell you, he heads to Jerusalem for Passover and for the sacrifice. In this chapter, is an explanation of why it's his time, because they have become utterly devoid of worship of Yahweh. There's a saying in the stock market that when the most people are the most negative, when there's blood in the streets, that's when you should buy stocks, because when people are the most negative, there's no place to go but up. Okay, there's not one more negative person to be found. You've hit bottom. For the Jewish leadership, for the temple, for the priests, there is no more Yahweh involved. They have reached a point they're utterly devoid. And now it's time for the Messiah. Now it's time for him. That's why it's the fullness of time. There's nothing else left. And now people will be open and ready to him and to what he's doing. I think it's beautiful. I mean, I think it's a good example when we say God does things in the fullness of time. This is probably the biggest example.
And I like that he leaves the door open. You won't see me again until you come to me.
It's a great point, Gene. And we do like to say that. I like to say there's always a way home. I don't care what you've done. There's always a way home. And so you're correct. He leaves the door open. If you come saying, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. If you come saying, okay, I get it, that's different. I don't think there's much chance of many of them doing it, but who am I to judge? But you're right, the door is open. And that's an important lesson to all of us about ourselves and about other people. The door is always there. Thank you.
Chapter 24, and this is going on. So it says, as Jesus left the temple and was walking away, his disciples came up to him to point out its buildings. Do you see all these things? He replied. Truly, I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down.
So if this seems odd, they're leaving the temple. Herod the Great, who was alive when Jesus was born, was also known as Herod the Builder. And he taxed the people mercilessly, but he built beautiful things. And he knew it would elevate Israel's status, Judea's status, right? The temple is bigger and more splendid than it's ever been. And the temple complex around it is fabulous. And these guys are walking away from the temple and looking around and saying, look, do you see that? Do you see these beautiful buildings? They're just talking. But it's almost like he anticipated this, and he turns around and he says, you see all this stuff? You see these amazing buildings? I'm telling you, not one stone will be left upon another. It's all coming down. It looks impenetrable because we've been there. This is also a prophecy. This actually happens in
70 AD, so 70 years.
They get crossways with the Romans, and the Romans even say, we're going to throw every stone down. And there are still, below where it was, this sort of graveyard of these big, massive square stones. But he's telling them, don't be fooled by the fact that this looks permanent. I'm telling you, it's going to get torn down, and not a single stone is going to be left upon another, which is not only prophecy, but when Matthew writes this, it still hasn't happened yet.
So remember, Matthew wrote this about AD 30, and it was still 40 years after that till the whole temple came down. While Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, so he left. So he's at the temple, and the Mount of Olives is just east, outside of the city of Jerusalem. So just to get an idea, so he's had all this talking to the big crowds, and now once again he's walking to a place where he's alone with his disciples. So verse 3, while Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will all these things happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Jesus answered, see to it that no one...
Can we pause for a second, because we're short on time, and I want to... So the end of the age, they still, and they reveal through this, they still think this Messiah is going to come like a king soon and straighten everything out, defeat all their enemies. That's the end of the age. This age, we're under domination. But at the end of this age, the Messiah is going to come in and take over, right? They still think that. They don't know how this is.
This is like 3 days before Jesus is going to be crucified.
and so he was saying, tell us, when will these things happen? So he's told them that the temple is coming down. Well, they think this is part of Messiah's doing. They think it's going to be part of this big cataclysm when he finds the end of the age, and Messiah is going to change everything. Tell us when it's going to happen. When are you finally going to make a move? You know, we've been waiting. Tell us how we're going to know, so we'll be ready for it. This is like today. People constantly, we're in some tumultuous times, and people constantly are speculating, is this the end times? Is this, you have to have heard it, because I hear it all the time. Look at the parallels on this.
Jesus answered, see to it that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Christ, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. These things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nations will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Then they will deliver you over to the persecuted and killed, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. And at that time, many of you will fall away and will betray and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and mislead many. Because of the multiplication of the wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, but the one who perseveres to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come.
So I'll just tell you briefly, I don't want to dwell too much on this. I just don't. The end time stuff, it just doesn't pay to try and get real, because we're told you're not going to know the hour of the day, right? It's a waste of time. But he says there are going to be things, but you're going to see wars and rumors of wars. If you look at this, you realize all the stuff that he's describing is not going to take place in one lifetime, right? He says there's going to be a lot of water under the bridge, and people are going to see wars, and they're going to see all these terrible, disheartening things, and they're going to insist now must be the time, right? This has to be it. So they thought several of the Caesars were the Antichrist, right? This was the end. They insisted that Adolf Hitler was. It's constant. It's a pastime with some people, and they want to know what he says. This stuff is going to happen. Then when it's going to get worse. And what does he say? At that time, many will fall away and betray and hate one another. I want to read just one verse out of this, though, and most of you get what's going on here. But verse 12, because of the multiplication of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. Now, to me, that's today. Not that I'm saying this is the end or whatever else, but because of the multiplication of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. And I am seeing things right now. I told Mary I was going to mention this. I had a guy, and she saw it. I mean, fortunately, there's like, but this guy just threatened to run me over in the HEB parking lot in the crosswalk. We played chicken. I played chicken with a truck. And normally I don't do that. But I just said, you know, I'm just going to walk. Well, it's dumb. But this guy got close to me, and he actually sped up until he thought he, but I see this in so many ways. Back in the time of Gideon, we during the time of what's known as the Judges, maybe the low point for Jewish history, there's a phrase that gets used. Each man did what was right in his own eyes. Whatever seems good for me is what I'm doing. And I see that so vividly, and at an increasing rate. We've reached a point in society where people don't feel like they have any sort of debt to anyone other than themselves, no obligation for anything other than what I want right now, me. And he's describing things that are to come. And I think Mary said last night, would you say about, are we close to the end times?
Yeah. Oh.
Well, she said, you know, are we closer? That's the one thing we can say. Yeah. Are we closer? Yes, we are.
Yeah. We don't know when it is, and we're not supposed to spend a lot of time thinking about it, but we know for sure we're closer than they were. Right?
This is a prophecy, though, that Jesus is leaving. And he's telling them, I know how you are. And you want to try and figure out when it's going to happen.
And the one thing I want to say, the last verse here, and the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. I remember when being I grew up very Catholic school for 12 years of my life, and we were with some friends on Friday, and I was talking about how I was always the one that would just ask the second question and get in trouble. And one of the second questions was, well, you know, there's all these places where the gospel isn't preached because they haven't heard about it, and what's going to happen to them? And you you get these answers. Don't ask the question. But I was thinking about it when we were studying this week, that verse about how the gospel will be preached everywhere. And think about today's time. You know, I know there's like places that don't have a lot of communication, but you know, what do they say? And what did you say Elon Musk is going to give?
Elon Musk is putting satellites up.
So, but, you know, think about how many people now have the gospel that, you know, in the 60s didn't have the gospel because we didn't have cell phones and they couldn't, you know, put it up on their phones. So it's all to say that, you know, like I said, we're closer than they were, and we're not supposed to worry about it.
Don't be alarmed. And that, I think, ultimately is the message. She says, here, I'll give you this. This is a prophecy. A lot of people are going to look at this over time because that's the way prophecy goes, you know. I mean, if it's long term, then there are going to be new people that'll be aware of it. There was a prophecy foretelling his birth that the Magi followed from probably Iraq. That's how prophecies go. But he says, I'm gonna tell you this. The main thing to take from it is don't be alarmed, and don't be a sap when people come and say I'm the Messiah. You know, don't be taken in. No, if they say, oh, look, he's out in the desert, don't go run off out there. That's not me.
There's nothing in here, but I'm not sure that Jesus was talking about the buildings in the first place. He's already past that. You guys should have picked up on this a long time ago, and you're still asking me about the end. It's beyond your comprehension. You're either going to have faith, and I hate to go back to my strong, or you don't. Don't know when it's going to happen. You take care of your faith, to Yahweh and you're okay.
The two things are inseparable. I agree with that, and there are often more things going on than what's on the surface, and I agree with that. He uses those buildings, that conversation, to explain to them that he's leaving, and that they're going to be. See, if they think his declaration as Messiah is imminent, that just put it to rest. Because there's going to be, nations rise and fall, wars, rumors of wars, famines, flood. That's not, if all that has to happen, they should be thinking to themselves, that's going to take a long time. That's not like a month down the road. This is a long time. So he uses that to tell them things that they won't understand for some time to come, but they do eventually. And we're told that too. God, we're humbled, we always are, that you notice us, that you would take the time to make provision for us. And that includes inspiring words that you had people record for us, that let us see your hand. Let us see the uncanniness of prophecy that say there's a plan here and always has been. And you show it to us if we're just open to looking at it. And we're grateful. We're thankful that you have your hand in this place, even when we know we only understand a small portion. We have all these concerns for our health and our finances and all the things, the people, but remind us this week that we're still a part of the plan and that we have that obligation to the people you put in our paths. Amen.
You guys can unmute yourself. Remember, there's a division of TV watching this afternoon. 3:45, the Dallas Cowboys play, and so do Green Bay. Not against each other. Green Bay has to win, so look for number 89. And Julie was saying that there is a way that, depending on who wins, it could be that Green Bay ends up playing Dallas.
Yeah, it could happen. Let me say that, because we're going to take a minute for that. Green Bay, I think, is the youngest team in the league. Is that right?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
They're the youngest team in the league. And if they win today, they make the playoffs, which is hard to believe for the youngest team in the league. So Ben has got to be just, excited, and Julie and Bob have to be excited for what's going on.
And it's 29 degrees where they are, so they're very excited and cold. Enjoy. We'll be watching.
Oh, there's so many of you online. I wish I'd had more time. It's good to see you.
All right, Mary, what's his number?
Pardon me? His number's 89.
89.
I was following 85 last week. And
no, 89. And he played a lot last week. So
got it.
Was
89.
Did lots of great blocks.
And we're not cold, but we're excited about them too.
There you go.
Chula.
Good luck, you guys.
Thank you.
Have fun.
Glad to see you, my love.
Bye-bye.
What's